The Kurakhove Cauldron has closed. Dozens of Ukrainian soldiers surrender. The front is completely collapsed. Good afternoon, dear friends. We continue our daily updates on the situation at the front. Before we begin, I would like to sincerely ask you to subscribe to the channel. Your subscription helps support and develop the channel. Thank you to everyone who has subscribed. As for the Ukrainian Armed Forces, UAF, at the front, the situation is truly disastrous. This is not an exaggeration. These are not just loud words. You may recall the 8-kilometer breakthroughs. Well, they are happening now. Moreover, in one village, 2 UAF companies have been encircled, and in another location, another 24 fighters have been surrounded, or even more. Almost all of them are 200 dead. Some have been taken prisoner. Breakthroughs are happening in other areas as well. Even Ukrainian analysts are sounding the alarm, saying that this is abnormal and questioning what is happening. So today we will analyze what exactly is going on. What has happened? Why is this happening at all? Additionally, tomorrow there will be a meeting between the Russian and American sides in Saudi Arabia, which will also be very interesting. Before that, I will say a few words about the situation in the Kursk region, and then we will move on to the area where the UAF is in complete collapse, losing territory by kilometers, unable to stabilize the situation at all. Kursk region. Intense fighting is ongoing in only 2 areas. The first area is the site of a recent failed Ukrainian offensive. Why do I call it failed? Well, for one, because their initial gains were minimal. At their peak, when the UAF column reached a particular point, 1 kilometer from Ulanka, they controlled approximately 10 square kilometers in total. Is that a lot? Objectively, not really. The Russian army achieves similar territorial gains daily, often even more. Meanwhile, the UAF only controlled those 10 square kilometers on the first day of their offensive, and now that number has been cut in half. The Russian forces have recaptured Fanasivka. I showed a video from there yesterday, right from the scene. So the Russian forces have retaken Fanasivka. The UAF is neither in the village nor in the surrounding tree lines. The same goes for Cherkasskaya Konopelka. The Russian army has taken back the village, as well as the tree lines, at least those to the west and south. What remains under UAF control? The UAF now only hold the hamlet of Kolmaki and some open fields. Out of their original 10 square kilometers, they now control just 4.5. Meanwhile, the Russian army has transitioned to its own offensive, not in this sector, where fighting remains slow and methodical, but to the northwest, where Russian forces have made significant gains. From the village of Sverdlivka, located on the border with the Sumy region, previously used by the UAF as a logistics hub and command post, the UAF has been completely driven out. A few days ago, we discussed how 80% of the village was under Russian control while the UAF clung to the remaining part bordering the Sumy region. But now it's over. The village is now under full, uncontested Russian control. This also opens an 8-kilometer road to Sudzha, a direct, unobstructed route with no defensive positions in the way. The expectation is that Russian forces will soon advance along it. Additionally, reports emerged yesterday that fighting has begun for the neighboring village of Lebedevka, a larger Russian offensive. But the truly large-scale Russian offensive is happening in another sector, with even more dramatic results. Even Ukrainian analysts are in shock as the UAF continues to abandon territory by kilometers. Let's go over everything in detail with a map. Russian army offensive near Kurakhovo and Velika Novosilka. Now let's move to the main areas of the Russian army's full-fledged offensive, west of Kurakhovo and in the Velika Novosilka area. Starting in the east, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is a complete disaster for the UAF. With the Russian breakthrough from the south, from Zelenivka to Ulakli, all UAF units in this pocket have been completely encircled. While many managed to escape before the exit window closed, some did not. Currently, it is known that 22 UAF soldiers were killed, 6 were taken prisoner, and an area of 9.5 square kilometers has come under full Russian control. Even Ukrainian military analysts are furious. Everyone says they should have retreated earlier. They all warned about this. Why wasn't the order given? These are the questions being asked by Ukrainian analysts. And I can answer, because the UAF command doesn't care. The main thing in reports is to show victories, claiming to hold back Russian troops, while flank encirclements come later. The most important thing in reports is to present victories, claiming that Russian forces are being held back, while ignoring the fact that Russian troops are bypassing on the flanks and later encircling Ukrainian forces. That part comes later. As for the village of Ulakli itself, fighting is ongoing, and the UAF garrison there is practically surrounded. And we are not talking about just 20 soldiers here, but rather 2 understrength companies, which is quite significant. Nevertheless, they have not been given an order to retreat. Yet with just one more Russian advance to the west, that's it. The trap will snap shut completely, leaving no way out. Although, to be fair, even now there is virtually no escape route. The only road from Ulakli to Constantinople is within 500 meters, less than 500 meters, of Russian positions. That means Russian forces have a direct line of fire on this road, an absolute shooting gallery where missing a target is impossible. As a result, more than 100 UAF fighters currently in Ulakli are doomed. The southern and eastern parts of the village are already under full Russian control. Situation in Constantinople. The situation for the UAF in Constantinople is slightly better. This is because they have more troops, better equipment, and still have some retreat routes. However, they have already lost a Leopard tank at the village entrance and failed to push Russian forces off the southern outskirts, despite repeated attempts over 2 days. Initially, Russian assault units rushed into the southern outskirts, capturing several houses. Then, they repelled UAF counterattacks before reinforcements arrived. As of now, fighting is ongoing for control of the village center. Meanwhile, if we move westward, a significant Russian breakthrough has occurred from the village of Razdolna to Bohatyr. A small armored column, consisting of 1 BBM and 2 BMPs with infantry, advanced from Razdolna to Bohatyr, covering over 8 kilometers. Unprecedented Russian advance. This is something I can hardly recall happening before, except maybe at the very start of the conflict. Usually, an advance of 1.5 to 2 kilometers is considered a good result, and 3 kilometers is excellent. But here, we're talking about over 8 kilometers, and I can tell you, it will go even further. Why? Because beyond the fortified positions, both to the north and south, the terrain consists of open fields stretching for kilometers. For example, to the north, there are nearly 10 kilometers of open ground. To the west, if we move from Bolatske, which Russian forces are advancing on, there is 20 kilometers of open terrain with no defensive positions, no fortifications, stretching all the way to the valleys of Iskra and Zelenyi High. This is why Ukrainian military analysts are extremely worried. And it's not just my opinion. Here's a screenshot proving that they are saying the same thing. 20 kilometers of empty space. This means that such 8-kilometer advances will soon become common, if not routine, and they will happen more than once. Another Russian breakthrough. Yesterday, another breakthrough occurred slightly south of this area. Though smaller, about 1.6 kilometers, it was still significant. A Russian column consisting of 1 tank and 4 armored vehicles advanced from its positions, moved unhindered to the village of Novoselka, deployed an infantry platoon, and withdrew. As a result, half of Novoselka is now under Russian control. From there, the advance is expected to continue toward Volnopol and then on to Shevchenko. Tactical adjustments and UAF weaknesses. The reserves that were pulled from this area to reinforce Pokrovsk did manage to stabilize the situation there. As a result, the Russian offensive on Pokrovsk's western flank has effectively stalled. However, this left other sectors exposed, and the Russian command is taking full advantage of that. In just 2 days, Russian forces have captured 35 square kilometers in the so-called Kurakhove pocket alone. And that's just this sector. If we add Russian gains in the Velika Novoselka area, plus advances on the right bank of the Oskil River in Kharkiv Oblast, plus the 4-square-kilometer push near Preobrazhenka yesterday, the total Russian territorial gain in 48 hours surpasses 50 square kilometers. Kupiansk direction and further Russian advances. Now let's shift to the Kupiansk direction. Adjustments to the map show gains for Russian forces on the western bank of the Oskil River near the village of Topoli. These adjustments are based on Ukrainian footage showing FPV drone strikes on Russian forward positions. reports of Russian storm units crossing the river in this sector first surfaced on February 5. Simultaneously, in the Krasno-Liman sector, Russian forces have taken most of the village of Yampolivka and advanced approximately 1 kilometer through the forested area east of the settlement. Chasiv Yar direction. According to some reports, Russian forces have advanced up to 2 kilometers south of Chasiv Yar, making successful assaults from the southeastern mine area and approaching the eastern outskirts of the village of Stupochki. However, there are no confirmed ground-level reports yet. Russian forces inflict heavy fire damage and advance on multiple fronts. At the same time, in the central part of the city, Russian troops are delivering heavy fire strikes on UAF personnel and equipment in the high-rise residential areas, including with the use of the TOS-1 A Solntsepiok heavy flamethrower system. Toretsk direction. Russian forces have eliminated a UAF pocket on the southwestern outskirts of Dzerzhinsk, securing control over the waste treatment plant and the racetrack. Additionally, Russian assault groups advance through single-story residential areas in central Sherbanovka, reaching the village's eastern outskirts. This information is confirmed by Ukrainian published footage showing attacks on Russian forward positions using FPV drones. Pokrovsk direction. On the right flank, as a result of decisive actions, the settlement of Beryozovka has come under full control of the center group of Russian forces, specifically the 110th Brigade of the Russian Armed Forces. This was officially reported by the Russian Ministry of Defense in its daily briefing yesterday. Furthermore, Russian forward units advanced up to 1 kilometer north of Yelizavetovka, moving toward the neighboring village of Malinovka. Meanwhile, pro-Ukrainian sources report that Russian troops have already begun storming Tarasovka, advancing actively from 2 directions. At the same time, fierce battles continue across the entire front line on the approaches to Pokrovsk, with both sides engaging in heavy fighting. Tactical gains in other areas. Russian forces reclaimed previously lost positions in eastern Dachinskaya. The UAF now holds only the northern outskirts, near the border with Lisovka. According to separate reports, Russian troops retook the industrial zone and most of the residential areas in Peshenoe. Russian forces advanced in the eastern part of Udaknoye, but there are no confirmed ground-level reports. UAF counterattacks and further Russian advancements. The UAF continues counterattacks against Russian positions in Kotlino and Peshenoe, attempting to push back the advancing troops. On the left flank of the Pokrovsk direction, Russian troops continue clearing operations in Zaporozhye. Forward Russian units advanced more than a kilometer along forest belts south of Nadezhdenko, aligning the front line up to Sribnoye. This information is also confirmed by the pro-Ukrainian resource Deep State in a recent publicatio.